So, next question is, was the album challenging to create? How was the experience of getting the photos and assembling them into an album?
Well, I've been working on this project for 4 years. In fact, it didn't even start off like this. It started off as a completely different project. And once you start something and you're dedicated to reaching that final product, it's challenging. It's not only do you learn about the craft, but you learn about yourself and the mistakes that you make, and you learn from those mistakes, and you learn of like what works with what and what works with what doesn't. I probably, in my entire collection for my book, probably like around 60 images, solid, but I probably have over 1,000 total images that I've taken for this project. And you just have to create a maquette and lay them out and see which goes with what is good. Sometimes the ones that are your favorites just don't make it into the book because it doesn't go the way that you think it goes. And things are always constantly changing. So creating the album, the photo book itself, was completely challenging.
Okay, this is like a follow-up. So you said you didn't start off this project knowing like where it was going to go?
That's correct.
So at what point did you know like, oh, this is like going to be like nostalgia themes?
So the project actually started off as more of a documentary project, and it didn't even involve my children. It involved a donkey rescue. And when I was photographing, even though I was getting great shots of what I wanted, I felt like I wasn't able to express myself as artistically as I wanted to. And plus then I was also limited by what I could gain access for through the farms and local charities and stuff like that. There are certain things that they didn't want me to see and photograph. And that kind of stymied my creativity. And so I don't know what it was, but my daughter being firstborn and me being a photographer, the whole house is filled with pictures of her, right? And then my son came along, and he didn't really get the photographic attention that the firstborn child did. And he came to me one day, and he was like, "Dad, why aren't there a lot of pictures of me in the house?" I was like, so I started taking more pictures, and that's what this project grew into. And so I'm not only making this book for them, I'm making it for me and for the viewers out there.
Do your pictures lean towards candid or stage photography, and what are your opinion on candid versus stage photography?
The majority of my stuff is candid, although there are things that are very much in the moment where they're hoarding something, or they find a salamander or something like that, and ask them to pose with that. My kids are very much aware of me and my camera. It really doesn't leave my side very much when I'm at home. That's because I've always wanted to be able to capture that moment. And so I'm always thinking, like, with the camera on my hip. And they're so used to it at this point that even if it was staged, it's still really candid for them because it's become second nature. And when you talk about the difference between candid and posed photography, I think they both have their place. For me, with this project, I believe that mostly the stuff, candid is the way to go because you capture that natural essence of wonder and exploration and childhood curiosity, or the emotions that sometimes are expressed through the photographs. Whereas something being posed, my kids can get a little cheesy sometimes and do funny poses and stick out their thumbs, or something like that. And it's just like, now you're ruining your moment. Just stop.
Now we're going to move on to our more concept-themed questions. So when we were looking at the album, we saw a lot of themes of like nature, facelessness, feet, and modernness. Can you speak more about how you created these themes and how you kind of put them together?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
You had themes, we saw themes at least, of like nature, facelessness, feet, and modernness. Can you speak on how these themes, how you work with these themes and how they work together?
Sure. Well, actually, if you look at this one right here, he's holding antlers, and that's the title of the photograph is Antlers. I live in a very wooded area. I've always grown up in the country. I don't live anywhere near Mercury High School. And so that's the environment that my children grow up in. So they're very explorative and going out in the woods and playing in a creek and, jumping in the leaves and finding small animals and stuff like that. And the whole concept for this project is to create conversations when my work is being displayed. So if someone comes across my photo book, and I want them to be able to flip through the pages and ask themselves that question with whoever they're sitting with, do you remember when? And that's where the title came from. It's meant to invoke a conversation. That's where that sense of nostalgia and memory comes from. It's, the photograph of the feet and stuff like that, that allows people to be able to put themselves into the environment where they may not have been. There's a certain level of anonymity when you don't see a face, or the face is blurred out, or something like that. So here, my son is holding a crab, and he's kind of making this claw shape with his hand, and you don't see his face. We know it's my son because that's what it's based off of, but we live in Maryland, and crab is a huge part of our culture, and people eat crabs, and this is stuff that they do. We find salamanders, they play in the woods. Children grow, and as a parent, watching when they're born, you can, their feet are like the size of your pinky finger. And then as they grow, they get bigger and bigger, and then it's like the size of your hand. And that's the metaphor of the feet. And then there's one of like my daughter with a leaf over her face where you don't see her, but you can embody the wonder of like, wow, look how big this leaf is, or she's there it is. So it's, or maybe she's using it as a mask, and there's an imaginatory thing. I understand that the project is not going to be universal for everybody. There's different cultures and different ethnicities and different people around the world that don't get to experience exactly this, but maybe, maybe with crab, it's like, oh, I remember going fishing with my dad, or it brings back some sort of memory, some feeling of nostalgia. And that's what this whole project is about.
I have another follow-up question.
Sure.
So for the idea of facelessness, there was one picture where I think your son was hidden by an iPad, or he had an iPad and he had a mask over his face. And it kind of brought up the idea that technology, different generations have different experiences. Was that intentional?
Absolutely. So my kids love to dress up in costume 365 days out of the year. That's their imagination. they don't really play video games and stuff like that. Even though we've recently, over the past couple of years, have gotten those, it's it's more of like he's on a Kindle or reading or comic book and stuff like that. And he's dressed as the Hulk, sitting on his bed with all of the comic book themed posters on the wall. He got into that kind of stuff because that's how I started in art. And in fact, the pictures on the wall were all mine for when I was young. And before I was a photographer, I was an artist, and I wanted to work for Marvel. And that was like what I wanted to do. So I was drawing comic books and stuff like that. And as you grow, you find your niche, and you understand like where your concepts grow, and understand more and more. With the mask, dressing up as a kid, whether it's a princess or a superhero, or there's plastic masks that I had when I was a kid that had the white line strap across the back, the plastic suit. There's all forms of nostalgic there. And if you don't recognize the face of my child, that's that level of anonymity where it's easier for the viewer to put themselves in their shoes and be like, I remember when I did something like that, or my sister did that, or I remember when my son did something like that.
So, with this album, what are you demanding from the art viewers? Or, in other words, what conclusions do you want the art viewers to draw?
So, I don't demand anything from the viewers. It's an open-ended interpretation. So, I created images that I feel like can be interpreted in many ways, whether it's playing in the sand or I want to create memories. Not just my memories, not just my children's memories, but memories from everybody and their childhood. And that's where this whole nostalgic idea comes from. But like I said, it's not going to be universal. I know I have one of like the Tooth Fairy, and like I have all these teeth and a bag with some money next to it. And when I was talking to someone that was from across the world in Asia, they were like, we don't have a Tooth Fairy here. We take the teeth and throw them on top of the roof. And it's supposed to be like a symbol of like good luck or something like that. So it's all now, like I said, different cultures and different places around the world, they're going to interpret things differently or may not understand exactly what's going in here. Like, for example, here we have a Christmas tree. Not everybody is Christian. We have multiple religions, but there are other religions that this is known as a celebrated religion here, and people understand what Christmas is, no matter what religion they are. And they have their own. And so even if they're not a Christian, and they see the Christmas tree, they understand the seasons, and like, okay, well, that to me is, Hanukkah or something like that, Kwanzaa, and then they think about their own memories of that season. So it's not that it's not like I'm demanding anything from my viewers. It's creating an opportunity for them to have some memories that they maybe have forgotten.
So your photographies or your photographs have a lack of parents, and we were wondering if it was intentional or if it was like any secret meaning.
Those are my feet. So, I think there's a couple pictures with my wife and the kids, and there's there's one of me like chopping down a tree and stuff like that. But yeah, it's intentional. It's number one, it's hard to take pictures when you're not behind the camera and get the shot that you want. So my wife is in more than I am, but And when you do see me, it's not usually full body. It's usually parts like feet or hands or whatever. But yeah, the focus is on my children and the memories that they grow. And I think part of that concept comes from the innocence of what they have and their wonder and their wanting to explore. They don't have fears yet. Like, my son will pick up one of those logs and find a snake and try to pick it up. Whereas my wife would squeal and run out. She'd swear we'd have to move. So I was like, there's a snake getting moved, right? But so that is intentional. It's all about capturing the moment, capturing the emotion, and really trying to hone in on, hopefully, recollection of memory.
So, is your view of this album different as a teacher at Magruder than as a photographer at Nassau County?
That's a good question. Is it different as a teacher, as a parent, as a photographer? I would have to say yes. As a teacher, the photo book is much deeper than what, as a teacher, I can teach to high school students. The concepts are way more complex. Like, this is for my MFA, which is basically the highest degree you can get as an artist. And so it's like kind of becoming a doctor in photography. And it takes years and years of being brought up and broken down and brought back up in order to understand these concepts. And it was a very rude awakening for me when I first started this program, because my professors would just tear my work apart and nitpick until you got it perfect. If I did that with my students now, I'd be the most hated teacher in the school, and no one would take photography. I'd be stuck doing ceramics or something. As a parent, it's special to me because these are my children, and I want to make this for myself and my children, because I'm not going to be around forever. I have an expiration date, but the book doesn't. And as my children grow, and they get older, and they have their own families, that book will still be there. And then, as their families get larger and they get older, the younger generation, the ones that I haven't been able to meet, they'll be able to see what I did for their grandparents, their great-grandparents, who are my children. And as a photographer, it's 100% conceptual of what I want to create. It's a labor of love at this point. I didn't always love it. Sometimes it was really difficult for me, and especially when you're choosing to pull out favorite pictures that you think are really good, but just don't really match the concept of what the project as a whole is going for. So that being the photographer part is the artist part. And those are three separate entities there. And what? That's a very good question. Thank you for asking.
So we do have a last question, but I feel like you touched on it already. So if there's anything else like you feel like you missed, or any last comment you want to add on your work.
So actually, I have a question for you. Have you, either of you, looked at the pictures that you have? There's only about, 15, 20 or so. Do either of you, do these bring back memories for anything of you that you've done?
I guess I'll go first since I have the mic. Personally, not much, just because I didn't grow up near the woods, and I was like rarely out the woods at all, and I spent most of my kid time indoors, doing digging stuff. So, for me personally, no.
I didn't spend much time out in the woods either. I have been to beaches though, so like with a picture like this and with the crab and the sand dollar, those did bring back some memories.
Right. Have you ever made a fort?
No.
Not in your house?
I think I had like a tent that I used. I don't think I made anything with like chairs and like buckets and the whole thing.
Sure. So that's the whole purpose of the book, is to symbolism is part of it as well. So here it's No Girls Allowed. It's the title of the picture. But he's made his little fort. He's got his Nerf gun there. He's watching his little Kindle. But there's all
Armand Cosme, please report to the counseling office.
Place.
Armand Cosme, please report to the guidance office.
So I guess this project is really meant to try to reach out and see if anybody is picking up memories that they've had from their childhood. Now, granted, you're still young and you haven't gotten to experience a whole lifetime of like picking flowers in a field or something like that. So these ideas are universal, but your input is very informative for me, so it makes me know that I still have some stuff I need to work on.
Cool. We do have one last question after that. Do you think, like, with the new generations and with technology becoming more part of, like, childhood experiences, that this project will kind of change how people view nostalgia?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, as they grow, just because the only reason why this project is ending soon is because I'm graduating. So I have to submit a final project. But this will go on probably for years after the completion of this part. So, yeah, absolutely. It's always going to change. As long as they grow, it's always going to change.
Well, congratulations on graduating soon, and thank you for answering our questions. Unless you have anything else, this concludes the interview.
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.